This is why you should never Google yourself. Honora Petrova became obsessed with constantly refreshing a website that predicted whether or not she would win her ice skating competitions. But things took an extreme turn when she decided to manipulate the website's predictions by editing it herself. This caused her to be banned from the competition and be dropped by her trainer. But things got so much worse when she refreshed the page again and saw a terrifying message about her. This time it said she would be an orphan. She immediately called her parents, but she only heard maniacal laughter over the phone. After her parents died of a terrible accident, the police said that there were no records of her calls to her parents at all. She became reclusive after that and moved to another country, where she tried to reinvent herself. Eventually, she stopped checking the website and things went back to normal, until she wanted to audition for the ice circus. She checked the website again to see whether or not she would make it, but it only said one thing. It said, at midnight, Honora Petrova died friendless and alone. The next day, her body was found next to her computer. This is why you should never Google yourself. Some of us might have done it once or twice, but for Honora Petrova, one simple search led to horrifying consequences. Honora had always wanted to be an ice skater. She was young, talented, successful, and had a famous trainer. The night before her first big championship win, she felt more anxious than usual. For fun, she Googled herself and came across a Wikipedia page saying that she would win. When she did win, Honora thought this must be a coincidence. But every time after that, the page would predict whether she won or lost. She checked it every single time, almost addicted to refreshing that site. When she was about to compete in another huge competition, she decided to manipulate the website by changing the outcome it predicted. But instead, it said, Honora Petrova is going to get what she deserves. Right after, she was accused of sabotaging another girl's skates, which ended up slicing her in the forehead. Even though Honora denied it, she was banned from the competition and was dropped by her trainer. She thought this must be the worst of it until she checked the website the next day and saw a terrifying message about her. Follow for part 2 of the story. This man thought he got away with something terrible he did as a kid, but he was wrong. After Derek ignored the boy in the street asking him for 1 penny, he went home. But he always felt a bit strange about their interactions. Then he went into the attic and found his old yearbook. While flipping through, he found a photo that would haunt him forever. When he was younger, him and his friends were bullies, and they had done something unspeakable to a boy. After beating him, Derek and his friends threw him in the river without a second thought. The boy never showed up to class the next day, but Derek and his friends assumed that he moved away. How was it possible that the boy Derek bullied years ago was the same boy asking him for a penny in the street now? Even though Derek grew up to be a successful businessman, he held the yearbook in his hands, horrified at how his past had come back to haunt him. Within the next few days, Derek took out his life savings. He brought the bag of money out to the boy and said, "Here's every penny I have. Now please leave me alone." But the ghost boy just looked at him blankly. Then, in an instant, his face turned into a terrifying smile. He said, "No, mister, that's not all," as the ghost boy reached into Derek's chest and pulled out his heart. This man thought he got away with something terrible he did as a kid, but he was wrong. Windsor was a rich businessman. Let's just call him Derek. Derek was walking home from work when a boy ran up to him and started pulling on his suit. He said, "Mister, give me 1 penny." Derek shouted, "Leave me alone," and walked away. The boy was left outside freezing in the cold. The next day, the same boy was standing on the street and said, "Mister, give me 1 penny." Derek was annoyed. He threw a penny at him and said, "Here, there you go, now leave me alone." But he could have never known who this boy actually was. This time, when he got home, he started feeling uneasy. Something about these interactions felt a bit weird to him. He went to bed, tried to fall asleep, but as soon as he closed his eyes, he heard a voice right up against his ear say, "Mister, give me 1 penny." Derek jumped out of bed. His wife told him to calm down, so he tried to. There was no one else in the room, but something was wrong. Derek began to remember what he did. When he was a young boy, him and his friends had done something horrible. Terrified, he went up to the attic and found his old yearbook. Then, flipping through the pages, he saw a photo. Derek thought, how was this possible? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Follow for part 2.
So in 5th grade, my sister was dating this guy named Isaiah. And I know 5th grade is really young, but they actually ended up dating for like 5 months. Anyway, so Valentine's rolls around and my sister gets Isaiah this beautiful box of chocolate. And it was a low-key bougie kind of chocolate. You know that chocolate that tastes really good. So she gets to school and Isaiah got her some chocolate too. So she was like, okay. So she's really happy about it. And then she goes to eat it and realizes that it tastes like shit. And her being in 5th grade, she was really offended by this. Like, wow, you really got me some shitty chocolate. So at recess, she was crying and crying and crying, and she was really upset about it. So anyway, she gets on the bus and I sit next to her and she's just crying about it. She's like, I don't know what to do. Like, this is so rude. And I was like, it'll be okay. Like, he's a bad boyfriend, this and that. So we get to our bus stop and we're getting off the bus and my sister collapses on the floor and starts screaming and crying. And my bus driver looks at her and goes, "What is wrong with you?" And I go with my 5th grade lisp, "Boy problems."
If you scare easily, swipe on. In 1989, a woman started hearing strange banging sounds in her walls and in the ceiling, and then one night the crawl space to her attic was open, so she went to go have a look. When she's just feet away, an old man suddenly appears in the crawl space and looks her dead in the eye before vanishing. There was nobody else in the house. Worried no one's going to take her seriously over an apparent ghost in her house, she ends up calling a paranormal investigator. When the paranormal crew arrived, they were actually very skeptical until they heard loud banging in the attic and they decided to go up and have a look. As soon as the two men get up into the attic, one of them screams and suddenly disappears. The other, who didn't have a flashlight, starts using the flash on his camera to illuminate the attic. And he takes one of the most famous pictures in paranormal history. His partner, who was in total shock, had been lifted off the ground and tied to one of the beams. That was the last night the woman ever stayed in the house. However, it's still being rented out today, but nobody stays longer than 1 or 2 months.
Put a finger down if in high school you had a YouTube channel and your whole school knew about it so you weren't embarrassed, and one day when you were sitting in your first period class, a girl came up to you and asked you why you were promoting your YouTube channel in the girls' washroom, and you had no idea what she was talking about, so obviously you ran to the washroom to investigate, and you found that written on the back of every single bathroom stall door was your YouTube channel and comments about how you were so amazing and beautiful and how everyone should subscribe to you, and this was really embarrassing because everyone was accusing you of writing these things, but you weren't, so you wrote a message back and asking this person to stop writing these things, and then the next day you found that they had leaked your personal information and written down your address on the bus that you take to school. So now you're really creeped out and you were scared that someone was stalking you. So you and your friends were determined to figure out who this person was. And the next day when you went to school, you all hid in a different washroom of the school trying to catch this person red-handed. And while you were hiding in the washroom, you noticed that a girl came out without flushing and she was holding a red marker. So you knew that you had caught her red-handed. So you followed her out of the washroom and you and all your friends went up to her and asked her if she was the one that had been writing on the bathroom stall. Like for part 2, it gets so good.
Ever wonder what would happen if you stopped sleeping? During World War II, the Russians wanted to find a way to keep their soldiers awake longer. So they came up with this awful experiment where they took prisoners of war, put them in a gas chamber, and then exposed them to experimental drugs to see how long they could keep them awake for. Initially, the drugs seemed great. The first 4 days, the subjects were agitated, but were normal. By day 5, they stopped interacting with each other and began acting extremely paranoid. On day 9, one of the subjects screamed for so long that he tore his vocal cord. On day 14, they started eating themselves. When they turned off the gas on day 15, all of the subjects began screaming in pain, begging for them to turn the gas back on. When they didn't, they all fell asleep and died.
Storytime of why it's never good to be in a best friend group of 3. So a little background information. I was in 4th grade and I was 9 years old, about to turn 10. Now I know you're thinking that's really young. Well sis, I was just smart enough to see the red flags early on, unlike half of you who probably didn't see them. Anyway, so I had 2 friends we're gonna call the one Becky and the one Mia. Now let me tell you a little bit about Becky. Becky was kind of a bitch. Now anytime that she saw Mia and I having our own conversation, she would pretty much bully us. And she would have 2 of her other friends tag along and do it also, Brooklyn and Riley. So the one day we're walking to PE and Mia and I are having a conversation. And in our gym class, you had to line up in groups of 3. So it would go Mia, Becky, and then me. Well, because I wanted to finish my conversation with Mia, I decided to sit in Becky's spot. So we're sitting down and then Becky marches over to where we're sitting and just stands there and stares at us. Then she walks away and goes and sits with her other friends. And at the end of gym class, she comes back over to us. Like for part 2. Story time about why you should never ever do drugs. So a little background information. In my town, on the 15th of June this year, 2 girls got kidnapped in my hometown. So I kind of knew these 2 girls. I mean, they went to my school, but that was really it. Because low-key, I didn't want to be friends with them, and I kind of hated them. They were in 7th grade, I was in 8th grade, so they were probably like a year younger than me. Anyway, so it was a Wednesday, and the last time they had been seen was at 8 p.m. with a 30-year-old man. They were supposedly doing drugs outside of a McDonald's. Well, I guess this man saw that they had been doing drugs, and he wanted some. Before that, I guess he kind of eased into the question because he was like talking to them, getting to know them, and I guess he thought he had a really good shot at getting some drugs. But when he asked, they said no. So then he asked a few more times and they finally gave them to him, but whenever they got closer, he grabbed both of them, put him in his van, and drove off. And he hid them in his house. Like for part 2.